Perfect. All right. So, good evening, everyone. Magandang gabi sa inyong lahat po. Naibag nga gabi. My name is Jerome Valoria. Pronouns he, him, and his. And I'm here tonight as your moderator for the panel discussion on Black liberation, forging genuine solidarity. And tonight we are going to be talking about Filipino slash Filipina slash Filipinx solidarity with the Black liberation struggle. And this is very much a critical conversation for us to be having, given the current socio-political climate, fancy words for it, given what's going on with the world right now, especially here in the United States. Tonight we are joined by two amazing and well-versed guest speakers. I'll introduce them in just a hot second. All right, folks. And then again, if you don't want your video to be recorded here, please turn off your camera. All right, so let me give y'all a rundown of our menu for tonight. First off, we have some community guidelines, just some housekeeping things. We also have introduction to our speakers, followed up by panel discussions. So we will give each of the speakers a platform to discuss a specific topic that we've designated for them. Then we'll also have time for messages from our partner organizations. We'll also do audience Q&A. So this is actually a very good time for y'all. Formulate those questions, get those juices flowing. And if you have questions, whether you're joining us here on Zoom or on the Facebook live stream, leave them in the comments, leave them in the chat. Vivian and I will be going through those for you. And then we will also have our closing remarks. So does that sound good to y'all? Good, great, awesome. So Vivian, please bring us to the next slide. All right, so guidelines and disclaimer. Content warning. There are mentions of military and state violence. If you have any questions, please feel free to share in the chat or on Facebook's live stream in the comment section, and we'll answer those during the audience Q&A portion. So this, again, is going to be recorded in live stream. So if you don't want your face to be shown or like your video, your camera to be on here, please shut off the video on your side. Okay. And then please do not take any screenshots during this panel discussion. However, you are more than welcome to take notes as you see fit. And then if you are interested in getting more materials regarding this presentation, as well as the discussion, please let us know and you can send us an email or send like an email right there. Next, please. And I'll get water. All right, so our first esteemed guest speaker for the night is Margaret Kimberley. So Margaret Kimberley is a co-founder and editor and senior columnist of the Black Agenda Report. She is the author of the book Presidential, Black America and the Presidents. She is also a contributor to the anthologies In Defense of Julian Assange and Killing Trayvons, an anthology of American violence. Ms. Kimberley is an administrative committee member of the United National Anti-War Coalition and the coordinating committee of Black Alliance for Peace. So let's give a warm welcome to Margaret Kimberley, folks. And then our next slide. And our second guest speaker of the night is going to be Kirby Araullo, and his bio right here. So Kirby Babalan Tayag Araullo is a renowned Filipino cultural barrier and currently the National Coordinator for Culture and Heritage for NAFCON, otherwise known as the National Alliance for Filipino Concerns. He is a Datu and Lakan, a direct descendant of the last paramount kings of Luzon, of both Lacandula of Tondo and Raja Matanda of Manila. He's also a descendant of anti-colonial revolutionary Katipuneros who fought for the liberation of the Philippines from colonialism. Datu Kirby's upbringing exposed him to the contradicting worlds of traditional politics and grassroots activism. Kirby is the co-founder of the Bulosan Center for Filipino Studies at the University of California, Davis, and for over a decade, he has been teaching Filipino people's history and writing in indigenous Philippine scripts, such as Baybayin and Kulitan. He is an alumnus of UC Davis, and he's He has also started his graduate studies in the field of history at Harvard University and on international human rights law at the Université Catholique de Louvain. I don't speak French, so very sorry. He's a visiting professor at various colleges in the Philippines and as well as a research fellow with Sinupan Sing Sing, a publicly funded institute for indigenous advocacy and the study of Kapampangan language, history, and culture. Dr. Kirby is well-rooted in his culture and passionate about his heritage. He strives to decolonize Philippine history and democratize ethnic studies through knowledge and play. He is also the author of the book Black Lives and Brown Freedom, Untold Histories of War, Solidarity, and Genocide. All right, folks, so give a warm welcome to both of our speakers for tonight. And now we're going to move right into the nitty-gritty of things. So we'll go right into the panel discussion. So first up, we have Kirby. And Kirby, your topic for tonight is historical roots and current impact of anti-Blackness and colonial mentality in the Filipino, Filipina, and Filipinx community.
Thank you. Let me share my screen real quick. Sorry, I'm trying to find it. There we go. Share screen. There we go. You can see the screen, right? Cool. Thanks. That's not actually my first slide. It's not letting me go back to this previous slide. Okay, cool. Just briefly, quickly, before I start, I just want to honor a friend of mine or a brother in the struggle who recently passed away. He was an activist, a youth activist who was really in the Black liberation movement in the Bay Area and also fighting for the rights of indigenous people in the Philippines. We recently lost him, and yeah, I just want to give a shout out to my brother in the struggle, Amado. We miss you. So just a reminder for us, I just want to give a brief background on the historical context of Black and Filipino solidarity, especially during the Philippine-American War. So for those who may not know, the Philippines, way before the Americans have come to the Philippines to liberate our people, we were fighting our own liberation. We were fighting for we had our own revolution led by this guy, Andres Bonifacio. Long story short, by June of 1898, the Philippines declared its independence, thinking that we had the support of Uncle Sam and the United States. But of course, the United States is not really a friendly ally during that time, especially now. They instead of respecting the sovereignty of the Filipino people, they actually invaded the Philippines and betrayed the promises they had given our revolutionary leaders. So they came to the Philippines because they wanted the Philippines as a gateway to the markets of Asia. They wanted the Philippines to be a source of raw materials, source of cheap labor, and as a gateway to the huge market of China and the rest of Asia. Just to give us a little bit of a background, that the Americans coming to the Philippines wasn't about liberation, it wasn't about the Filipino people's freedom, but it was about capitalism. It was about to expand their imperialist agenda. Oops. My bad. So we press something on my phone. And these are just some pictures of the Philippine-American War, because of course our revolutionary leaders were like, that's not nice. And are confusing for historians because officially Uncle Sam was like the war was over by 1902, but in reality the war lasted until 1913 in Mindanao, and the violence, the genocide actually lasted until the 30s in Mindanao as well. So the war wasn't really that sort of a, they don't even want to call it a war in American textbooks. They call it the Philippine insurrection, or like it's as if we're just rebels and we didn't want to accept, or like we were just ungrateful that they liberated the Philippines from the Spaniards. But in reality, we fought for our freedom. Our people fought for our freedom. We had our own republic when they invaded the Philippines. So again, a reminder too is that the Philippine-American War was actually a genocide. We don't want to call it. I mean, a lot of historians don't even call it a genocide, but it was. If you look at the numbers of those who perished in the Philippine-American War, the American government, the U.S. history textbooks would, even the Filipino textbooks sometimes would tell us that only 200,000 Filipinos passed or were killed during this war. But in reality, by 1901 alone, on the island of Luzon alone, there was already 600,000 deaths. That's based on American military records. So that's already like, 3 times more than the total numbers that they would like to tell us. So the casualties was actually closer to a million, between 1 million to 3 million people. And if you just to put in context, the Philippines during that time had a population of between 8 to 9 million. So if 3 million people died in the Philippines during this war, that's a third of our people dying because of this unnecessary war. Just to go over a little bit of the pictures, these are some images from the war itself. I just want to especially focus on the one on the upper right side. So that's a newspaper cartoon depicting how American General Jacob Smith ordered the death, the killing of all the people on the island of Samar. So the order was actually to kill everybody above the age of 10. And it was a terrible atrocity. It was a genocide. Imagine an entire island where the entire population, everybody who's above the age of 10 was killed. And this is not a small island in the Philippines. If you're familiar with Philippine geography, Samar is one of the biggest islands in the Philippines. It has 3 provinces today. So it's a huge island where everybody was killed, all because he wanted revenge for a few dozen American soldiers who were killed in one of the towns in Samar. So that's just one of the examples of how atrocious the war was. And then on the bottom right is in Mindanao, in Sulu, where indigenous Muslim Tausug people who were just trying to escape the war, hid in the mountain, hid in the crater of a dead volcano for many years, just living peacefully. But the American imperialism wanted or did not want that image of being free from American control. So they massacred the entire village. There was between 900 to 1,000 people, and only around 8 or 9 of them survived. So that was another. This is just like examples of how atrocious the war was in the Philippines in the 1890s up to the 1900s. Just to give you a context and a background. So I was asked to talk about how are the roots of anti-blackness in Filipino culture, in our society. Just a little bit of a background so what do you call this? Pre-colonial Philippines wasn't perfect, but Spanish colonialism in the Philippines really heightened that colorism, that white people being on top and Black indigenous Filipinos being in the bottom of the. They don't even consider them when they on their writings. They don't even consider them people. So they heightened that colorism and anti-blackness in our culture. And then it was even made worse when the United States came over to the Philippines. So again, I mentioned the war earlier. People don't realize that while the war itself was still raging in many parts of the Philippines, the United States already sent teachers in the Philippines. So people would think that, they sent teachers to educate Filipinos after the war. But no, it was happening around the same time they were killing people. They were killing indigenous people in different villages in the Philippines. They sent teachers to educate us, but it was actually more of a brainwashing and indoctrinating us into this idea that Uncle Sam and the United States were there to help save us from our own, from ourselves. They weaponized education, and they were quick to send 10 teachers in the Philippines to educate or miseducate us. That's when they started teaching English. That's when they started even the indigenous languages in the Philippines. They started calling them as mere dialects. So even that alone is like very degrading for a lot of our indigenous folks. There was a lot of brainwashing. I remember studying this. Even the curriculum itself wasn't even meant to educate. It was meant to create an army of workers, an army of people who just follow orders. So even the whole curriculum is geared towards creating this cheap source of labor that they could exploit. And it was also around the same time when they really ingrained in our minds that this anti-Black ideas in our culture. Oh my God, I'm trying to say. Another person I want to highlight in terms of miseducation of the Filipinos, even the term miseducation actually borrowed it from the Black community. We borrowed it from Carter G. Woodson. And Carter G. Woodson, a lot of people don't realize that he was actually a teacher in the Philippines during this time. He was one of the people that the Americans sent to the Philippines to teach us U.S. education. But he saw how how fucked up it was. He saw how Filipinos are being brainwashed into accepting white supremacy. So he quit and he came back to the U.S. and made it his life mission to so that the black people would not suffer the same cultural genocide that the Americans were doing in the Philippines. So now he's known as the father of Black history. Um, and yeah, so he saw this firsthand how our people are being brainwashed into thinking that we ourselves are not civilized, that we ourselves are subordinate to white people. Even today, you see a lot of this in our culture. How more than half of the Filipino actors in TV are half white. If you think about it, or like are mestizo or mixed ancestry. So even the culture was really like whitewashed and brainwashed. They wanted to brainwash our people to think that so that we would accept American rule. Um, and even if you ask some of our elders, they would actually say like, "Oh, the Americans were good. They gave us education." Because again, they grew up in the system where Americans are always painted as the heroes. In fact, the textbooks up to the 60s and the 70s and the 80s in the Philippine education system was highlighting George Washington, highlighting Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, but not our own leaders, not our own heroes. So that alone is an indication of how they miseducated our people. Um, in terms of how I just want to give another. I'm a storyteller more than anything, I guess. I want to share a story of the most famous black soldier in the Philippines who fought on the side of the Filipinos during the Philippine-American War, and that's Captain David Fagan. I'm pretty sure a lot of you may have seen his pictures, his things about him going around on social media, especially in the recent months. In the Filipinx community. So Captain David Fagan was among the soldiers that were sent to the Philippines to fight on the front lines. He was a private in the U.S. Army, but he later became a captain in the Philippine Revolutionary Army. To share his story in respect to the time, Captain David Fagan was the first black soldier who switched sides to join the Philippine Revolution against American imperialism. But he wasn't alone. A lot of people would think that he was the only one. No, he wasn't. There was a lot. We just don't know their names. We just don't know their numbers, how much they are, because Uncle Sam wanted to keep that a secret because they don't want to show that there's this solidarity building between brown and black people in this war and genocide. But Captain David Fagan was the very first one, and he was the most famous one. He switched sides within months of being in the Philippines because he saw how the racism, the anti-blackness, the things that he was suffering in the U.S. was the same things Filipinos were suffering under American rule in the Philippines. So he switched sides within months of being in the Philippines, and he joined the Filipino Revolutionary Army. One thing about David Fagan that I want to mention is that he immersed himself with the people. He didn't just fight for our liberation. He immersed himself with our people. He learned not just one, but at least two Filipino languages. He learned Tagalog. He learned Kapampangan. He was stationed in Pampanga. I'm pretty sure he also learned the indigenous Aita language because he also immersed himself with the indigenous Aita community in the Philippines. For folks who may not know, the indigenous Aita are the most indigenous people in the Philippines, and they're black. So the very first people in the Philippines are black. We don't even recognize that sometimes. So he immersed himself with the community, and he earned this heroic title or this name, Pugot. If you're Filipino or grew up in the Philippines or know about Filipino culture, the term pugot now in Tagalog in Filipino language means beheaded. But back then, our ancestors actually revered the term pugot. Pugot, for example, my own background as indigenous Pampangan mythology, is that the pugot is the protector of the land, the protector of Mother Nature, the protector of the people, the indigenous people. So pugot would only hunt you down if you hurt Mother Nature, if you cut trees without the proper respect and ritual, or hurt an indigenous community. That's the only time that pugot would hunt you down. But the Spaniards turned this into a monster, and then the Americans, since David Fagan became this mythological pugot, like an embodiment of this mythological being from our roots, they really turned it into a monster that now pugot means beheaded, because David Fagan, because of his heroic deeds, he earned this title, and then he became elusive. The Americans sent numerous assassination attempts to him, numerous abduction attempts, but he always escaped it. So he he became this mythological figure that defended the people against Americans. He would raid Americans. Anyways, I'm not going to go into details of his heroic life. There's books written about him, but he became this hero to the indigenous Filipinos in the Philippines, the indigenous Aitas, the native Kapampangas, the Tagalogs. He became this hero, this mythological figure that the United States wanted him dead, so that they had a bounty on his head. And then one day, a Filipino guy surrendered a head to the Americans. We don't know if it's David Fagan. It was never verified. It was just a black head. They don't even know if the head was a black person. It was just like a rotten head that they gave to the Americans to claim the bounty. Rumor has it that it was actually David Fagan's friend who surrendered the head, a random head, just so he can have money to give to David Fagan. But the truth was that we never know when, or we never really, there was really never an official record of when he actually died. The Americans just assumed he was dead, and created this mythology, or like this urban myth, that urban legend that there's this black beheaded ghost. That's how we end up with them. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but that's how we ended up with this idea of Pugot being this beheaded ghost hunting Filipinos in the dark, hunting us down. And it was a scary story. I grew up in the Philippines. That it was one of the scary stories that our people tell us. But in reality, it was a corrupted version of the story of a guy, of a war hero who defended our people's liberation. They wanted to vilify him. What do you call it? So he embraced our people. Again, he wasn't the only one. And after his supposed death, he was still being seen around the Philippines, in different parts of the Philippines, which added more to his mythology of being this mythological Pugot protecting our people. And he was actually welcomed and embraced by the Aita community, the indigenous Aita of Central Luzon, of Pampanga, where I'm from. So he was embraced by the Aita, the Black Aita community in the Philippines, and they were the ones who hid him after the war, and a lot of the oral traditions said that he died peacefully amongst the Aitas in the mountains of Central Luzon. But yeah, that's the story of David Fagan, just to show you how a war hero his story was corrupted into this black ghost, the beheaded ghost that hunts our people down, that hunted us. But in reality, he was a war hero that actually hunted Americans and to protect our indigenous folks. So just to show you how our even on our oral traditions, a lot of like, what do you call this, whitewashing of the histories of our people because of because of the colonial miseducation of our people. Yeah, he wasn't the only one. There was a lot of black soldiers who stood up for our people. I mentioned the atrocities that happened in Mindanao, the genocide that happened in Mindanao. A little known fact, even to Filipinos ourselves, is that the black soldiers, even those who stayed with the U.S. Army, refused to participate in the genocide that was happening in Mindanao. So a lot of the indigenous folks in Mindanao actually have a high respect to black people to this day because of how they stood up against atrocities against our indigenous people. So yeah, I just want to end my part with these two slides. One is this comparing these two images. On the left side, we have a magazine cartoon, a political cartoon from the war, where if you read the caption below, it's the Filipinos' first bath. So it's President McKinley bathing this unruly Filipino child, the savage child, this unruly child, with the sacred waters of Western civilization. And in the back, you see Puerto Rico and Cuba already dressing up like little Americans, because by then they have, they were also fighting their own liberation in Cuba and Puerto Rico. But in this image, particularly, they're depicting the Filipinos being this unruly kid who didn't want to be bathed with the sacred waters of Western civilization. But that's how they want to depict their coming to the Philippines to give us education. Or the quote from McKinley was that he had a dream. He talked to God, and God told him to come to the Philippines to Christianize Filipinos, to educate Filipinos, and to civilize Filipinos. But in reality, what they did, instead of bathing us, as you see in this picture, instead of bathing us with this sacred waters of civilization, they actually drowned us in white supremacy and anti-blackness and imperialism. They drowned our people. These are an actual picture. This is an actual picture of the torture that we now call waterboarding. So they did this in the Philippines in the 1890s against the Filipinos. The Filipinos, regardless if they were revolutionary soldiers or just a mere an innocent villager who just wanted to be, safe from the war. And then, oops. So there's a lot of things we had to know about our history to really understand why we have this anti-blackness in our culture. Why papaya soap is the biggest one of the biggest industries in the Philippines, is whitening products. There's a lot of historical roots on how, or that started beginning with the Philippine-American War, and how they tried to bury the solidarity between Black and brown people that began in the Philippine-American War and still continues to this day. So yeah, just a little phrase I want to remind people of: to know history, know self. And because we don't know our history, then we don't really know ourselves. And if we don't know ourselves, then we cannot be really genuinely be supporting others. And the last quote I want to leave us with is from Fred Hampton, where he said that we've got to face the fact that some people say you fight fire best with fire, but we say you put fire best with water. We say that you don't fight racism with racism, but we're gonna fight racism with solidarity. So yeah, that's the end of my part. I hope I didn't go over time. I hope I made sense. Trying to fit everything in 15 minutes.
It is all good. No worries. So thank you so much, Kirby, for sharing your input. And now we're going to move right on to the next part of our panel discussion. We're going to give the floor to Margaret. So Margaret, I don't know if you had any slides ready or anything of that sort.
No, I'm just going to talk.
All right, great. So Viv, you can go ahead and spotlight Margaret, given that you'd like to be spotlighted as well. So for your topic, we have historical roots of the Black Liberation Movement and the current impact of white supremacy in the US and beyond.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. I had no idea that Carter G. Woodson taught in the Philippines. He is the father of Black History Month. He first founded an event. It was first Black History Week, and then became Black History Month. His famous work is The Miseducation of the Negro. And so that's fascinating. I did not know that at all. And that is why we need international solidarity. We need to know about these connections that we have with one another. I don't think he used the term colonized, but I think his book speaks to what Kirby was mentioning. We're a colonized people too. It's very difficult not to be. It takes a constant effort to be knowledgeable about world history, including history of the Philippines, Black American history, African history, the history of the colonized world. And that we have expressions or holidays, or when I went to the Philippines once in 2015 for an ILPS assembly. And I have a cousin who lives there. He was there in the military. He met a Filipino woman and married, and he's lived there for decades now. This event was in November, and I remember seeing Christmas trees up, or not real Christmas trees, but artificial trees. It was clear what they were. And I said, well, here we are in a tropical country, and people have these fake evergreen trees. But then I asked myself, I said, well, why do you decorate an evergreen tree every December? That's not your people's history. I'm descended from Muslims. Every Black American, excuse me, every African descended person in North or South America or the Caribbean is descended from Muslims, is descended from people who practiced African religions. And yet there I am every year with still have pine needles in my apartment at this time of year. So this is something that we all must fight against. And that is why, one of the reasons why I said yes to this invitation. I want to thank Kindig Sindao. I first saw them perform a few years ago in Toronto. The conference Resist the US-Led War Movement. And I looked back at some of the videos and saw some of my new friends there. That was a great experience for me. And as I said, I look forward to every opportunity for international solidarity. I am, as Jerome said, I'm an editor and senior columnist at Black Agenda Report, blackagendareport.com, founded in 2006. And it's given me a deeper appreciation and understanding of the world. We analyze the news from a Black left perspective, very Black, very left. And I'm proud to say that Black Agenda Report provides not just commentary and analysis, but also provides historical analysis, such as that which explains the relationships between all oppressed people. And by the way, I first heard of Mr. Fagan. He was the subject of an article in Black Agenda Report some years ago. And as a Black person, I'm very deeply, keenly aware of the connections that we see on a daily basis between US imperialism and white supremacy. The US and its allies have done great damage to the people of the global South. The history of European colonialism and of settler states resulted in genocides, many genocides around the world. And in keeping with this theme that Kirby brought up, we aren't taught that conquistadors and pilgrims brought diseases to indigenous people. Labor was stolen and built the nations of North and South America. Everything from sugarcane to cotton to gold mines were all worked by chattel slaves on land stolen from indigenous peoples. But history doesn't stop in neat time frames. You know, we're still living under that legacy. The British, this country was a colonial settler state of the British. And their other states are still very closely linked. The British colonial settler states of Canada, the US, Australia, and New Zealand continue to work together. And they're now known as the Five Eyes. They are connected through a surveillance state web that spies on people who resist the system all over the world. And even their own citizens like Julian Assange are not safe should they defy the imperialist narrative, which by definition needs an active surveillance apparatus. The European nations never gave up their colonial imperatives. We've seen that in recent days, this disastrous explosion in Beirut, Lebanon. The cause is to be determined. You can show me talking, by the way. That's fine. It's probably more interesting to see my face than the photo. So that's okay. But there was this terrible explosion in Beirut where it is believed, there are many theories, that there was a ship, a cargo ship, filled with 2,000 tons of ammonium nitrate, which is a fertilizer. It was used to blow up the federal building in Oklahoma City, and destroyed much of Beirut, people killed and injured. And suddenly we saw the president of France, President Macron, showing up to give condolences and assistance. But Lebanon is a former French colony, and the French in particular are very clear. They have never given up control of their colonies around the world. And so we have to be careful when we see people like him who, as Kirby said, they help, they civilize, they bring something which people could have on their own without any interference from invaders. I just want to say that. But here in the United States, we see a country which is a hegemon, an economic and military hegemon. There's a military budget of our country, which is larger than that of the next 10 nations combined, with 800 military bases around the world, a defense department that creates more pollution than any other entity or nation. And if you visit Washington, D.C., you will see something interesting. Defense contractors like Raytheon and McDonnell Douglas and Boeing advertise on billboards and in the metro, their subway system. So if you didn't know who runs Washington, you would find out just by looking around that city. Military spending takes up 60% of the federal budget and is literally why Americans cannot have nice things. We cannot have a public health care system, infrastructure, proper education, support for people in need, because 60% of the budget goes to imperialism. And we can't have a system that's set up to enrich corporations that are in the business of death and destruction that also meet the people's needs. Those are incompatible ideas. It's little wonder that this country has more death and dislocation during the COVID-19 pandemic than any other. The nations with the greatest success in treating this disease and preventing impoverishment are those that are either fully socialist or which have robust public sectors which provide for public needs. And I forgot to say something, I just thought of it. It's Fidel Castro's birthday. Happy birthday, Fidel. I don't know how he would be in his 90s if he were still alive, but it's important for us to note that. And I suddenly remembered that. But anyway, let me go on with my remarks. We have a country where the people, Black people in particular, are victimized by the military as much as African people are all over the world. The US, like any other empire would do, has divided up the world into sectors, military sectors. Every country on earth is in one of these US commands. There's a NORTHCOM and a SOUTHCOM and a EUCOM and a CENTCOM and a PATCOM. And in 2008, at the end of George W. Bush's term, the US Africa Command, AFRICOM, was born. Now, nearly every African nation has some relationship with AFRICOM. Their militaries are under control of the US. Only one country, Eritrea, has no such relationship at all. There are an undisclosed number of bases across the continent, but we do know the result of this interference is that the nations and the people that are under US rule have no sovereignty. So here inside the US, we also see white supremacy and a militarized society. Police in this country act just as colonizers do all over the world. They're an occupying army, just as in Palestine or any other state ruled by white supremacy. The killing of George Floyd on May 25th was just one of 5 which took place that same day. An average of 3 people are killed by police daily, with a yearly total of over 1,000. Local police, in fact, have military equipment. The 1033 program gives surplus military equipment to police departments all over the country. In big cities and small towns, police have armored vehicles of the kind that you'll see in Iraq or Afghanistan. And this was done with the connivance of Congress, including members of the Congressional Black Caucus. And these are people, they may take a knee for show, but they also passed legislation giving police and the military special protections. We have to be committed to fighting aggression abroad and here at home too. We can't behave otherwise. During the recent presidential campaign, many leftists supported Bernie Sanders because he dared to advocate for government programs that would benefit the people. They did so even though he was a full supporter of imperialism around the world and the mistaken belief that he could be moved or that they had to settle. There is no settling. We cannot have domestic tranquility if our country is an empire. We cannot expect just treatment for ourselves if the US can sanction people and kill them in Iran and Venezuela and Syria and Cuba and Zimbabwe and Nicaragua or other nations. And I'd like to talk about sanctions a little bit here. We may think that sanctioned nations cannot do business with the US or with government or businesses or individuals. In fact, the US threatens any country that breaks those blockades with more sanctions. That means that those countries I mentioned can't conduct financial transactions anywhere and their people face deprivation because of it. Sanctions are war by other means, and we must actively speak out against them. But we have to be especially vigilant in this year, in a presidential election year. We can't be fooled into believing that the political duopoly in this country is anything other than an enemy that must be opposed. This has been a year of great tumult, which is a good thing. The death of George Floyd sparked protests across the country, which were not just about police violence. There is anger and desperation about 150,000 COVID-19 fatalities, the shutdowns which have put millions of people out of work, and a system which can't even continue the meager $600 it gave to the unemployed. All of these issues are linked, and we must be careful to advocate only for those things that give power to the people. For example, defunding the police may sound like a good idea, but we've already seen cities use budgetary sleight of hand to give the appearance of starving the police beast when nothing of the kind has happened. Or in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where this story all began, and we were told that they were getting rid of their police department, and really all they're doing is changing the name. The city council said they were going to do it. This commission said they couldn't do it. So there's no change in Minneapolis. We have to have community control of the police. The AAPRP, the Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression, has led the way here. We must have the right to hire, fire, and prosecute police and determine where they can and cannot go, who they can and cannot police. But community control of the police is not possible in a place where people aren't in control of any aspect of their lives. The word democracy is a sham, but we must work to give it meaning and demand control over our lives. That's why solidarity is so important. It is all to the good that this new protest movement is multiracial. All of our demands must be connected, even as each group speaks to their own particular needs. This is a historic opportunity that we cannot miss. Joe Biden can't improve our lives. Kamala Harris can't improve our lives. For one thing, they have no interest in doing so. They've said so. Joe Biden told a group of funders earlier this year, nothing will fundamentally change if I become president. So when people say they'll move them to the left or hold their feet to the fire, first of all, they're lying. They have no intention of doing that. And even if they do, you're trying to get people to do something they've already told you they're not going to do. So we have to choose freedom and solidarity. And we cannot have one without the other. And this time has been a learning experience. The Black community has suffered in recent decades as our leaders were assassinated, imprisoned, and co-opted. And it's been a long time since the Black community has led in a truly radical movement. That's why the Black Alliance for Peace was formed in 2017. Our goal is to resurrect that Black radical tradition, which was of one mind in stating that the Philippine War was a great wrong. People such as W.E.B. Du Bois and Ida B. Wells Barnett quite publicly stated that this was a war of aggression. And that is what we must recapture at that time. So I'm going to have gone over by a minute. I digressed a little too much at the beginning, but I think I will wrap up my comments here. Thank you so much.
Well said. Thank you so much to both Kirby and Margaret. So now we're going to move forward and look at what is genuine solidarity in practice. And we have a few structured questions that we formulated as well. And then this will actually be a nice segue into the audience Q&A. So one of the questions we have for Kirby, let's see. So given the related experiences of racial and ethnic injustice in both the Black and Filipino communities, what is the role of Filipino cultural organizations in uplifting the Black Lives Matter movement?
That's a really good question. Wait, can you hear me now? Cool. I'm not muted. Just making sure. But yeah, that's a really great question, and how a lot of times people think cultural organization are just there for culture, but culture is political. Just showing our own culture is political. But to answer that question, it's really like hosting events like this, educating the community on the issues, and not just like not just the ones that we see on the news, like not just the ones that are going viral right now, but also like the issues in the community, our own community. I believe Margaret mentioned it earlier, to also educate ourselves with the issues that our communities are facing, because we cannot really stand in solidarity with other communities if we don't even know our own issues that our communities are facing. The same police brutality, violence that's happening against Black people in America. Similar thing is happening to poor people, indigenous people in the Philippines under the current president and previous presidents. So really educating ourselves with the issues at hand, not just also like, but also immersing ourselves with not just educating in terms of like, oh, I'm learning this from the book, learning this from this website, from this video, documentary, or whatever, but also really listening to the people on the ground, like really immersing yourself with the community on the ground, people who are facing these issues in everyday lives. Really listening to them, immersing and learning from them. So that's what I meant by educating ourselves, not just from the traditional miseducation that our system is telling us what education is, but it's really like listening to the people in the community on the ground and sharing those stories, sharing those struggles. Did that answer the question?
Yes, perfect. Thank you. And then we do have another question for you, Kirby, before we move to Margaret. Let's see. Okay. So how do we use our platforms and social media to effectively spread awareness about these issues?
I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is that do what you're good at to spread awareness in these issues. Do what you're good at. If you're good at making videos, make videos. If you're good at writing, write things. I guess what I want to share too, I guess this is just an answer broadly in general on how to be a better ally or a better activist in our community. Something I learned from my father, who was a anti-imperialist activist in the Philippines in the 60s, in the 70s, 80s. He's not that old, 80s. He's gonna get mad at me. But what he raised me, that what he told me when he was raising me was that there is nobody's a perfect activist, that nobody knows everything, but everybody can do something about it. Nobody can do everything, but everybody can do something. That the key is to be open to criticism, to also self-criticize, and to study the conditions, and again immerse ourselves in the community, and the realities that our people are facing around us, that we must again recognize our privileges and turn them into tools to uplift the masses. Because I grew up having privilege, but you need to use that privilege not to be safe and to hide from the world, but really to use those tools to uplift the masses, to learn, and again unlearning. There's a lot of unlearning that we have to do, especially in the Filipino community, to learn and learn from one another, to build solidarity and to uplift each other. That again, being an activist or fighting for the liberation of our people is not about being the loudest or being always in the front of the protest, not about being in the front of the street, having the megaphone. It's not about, putting yourself in front of the movement, but rather really immersing yourself with the movement, with the people. That being an activist is understanding that, it's never about you. It's never about you, but it's about serving the community, serving the people, especially the most vulnerable. Again, to answer the question, is like, use your talents. If you have a certain specific talent that you're really good at, use it to educate the community. And then again, I guess the last thing I want to say is that nobody's born woke. Nobody's really born woke. We all start from somewhere, and then that reminder to people is that it's better to start now than never. There's a lot of people who may not be on the same page as us, but if we really educate ourselves, educate one another, there's we can always start somewhere. Again, nobody's a perfect activist, but everybody can do their best to best serve our communities and genuinely serve the people.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yep, that was perfect. And now for Margaret. Oh, my other computer is doing something weird. Okay, perfect. So I have two laptops going. Sorry, folks. So one of the questions we had from Margaret, um, how can we avoid performative solidarity?
Well, that's tough because that's encouraged so much. I think we have to ask ourselves what is the goal of every action? If our actions are not advancing the movement, if our actions are not educating the people, if our actions are not in opposition to the system, then it's performance. We don't want to be like members of Congress wearing kente cloth and taking a knee, while at the same time giving Donald Trump everything he asked for, actually more than he's asked for in military spending. We don't want to be phony. We have to be consistent. We also have to be in solidarity with groups. We need to be organized. We have to have organizing. That's something Black Alliance for Peace is working on very hard. We have to educate each other. We have to struggle together and debate. We can't be afraid of struggling even with people that we're in solidarity with, so that when someone, and that they're a person who's, you know them to be a revolutionary, you know them to be a person with the best politics, but they say, let's defund the police because seems popular and it seems to make sense. You have to be in a position to engage with them. And you have to ask yourself, and it's difficult to do because there is a lot of confusion. Even in the Black community, there's a great deal of confusion. And it's by design. Years after the liberation movement, after leaders were assassinated, we have political prisoners still in jail. We have people who were co-opted and bought off. We have this created this Black political class, which does not serve our interests. It can be difficult to see what is performative and what is truly making a difference. I would say see who's taking the action. If you see members of Congress taking a knee, that's performative, that's for sure. And you can't be afraid, and that's difficult for people who are not Black because, for example, there were people in Portland who were angry and felt that white people had taken over the protest movement. Well, this was a moment for everyone to work together. I didn't see it as a bad thing that there were white people taking to the streets in Portland, not at all. We have to defend everyone's politics. So if someone has the right politics, I don't care if it's a white person. So it takes a lot of discernment and it can be difficult, but I would say consider the source, look at who is taking the action, look at what it is meant to accomplish. And if you ask yourself these hard questions, and if you're in solidarity with people who are serious, you can find out.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Margaret. And then the last question for this little section before we open the floor up completely for the audience. Just a little preview of, what we mentioned later. What are some ongoing actions we can participate in right now to continue supporting the movement?
Join us in I believe we're going to get to that later, but Black Alliance for Peace, everyone should follow Black Alliance for Peace. We are a Black-led movement, but we certainly appreciate our allies. And our demands are to close the military bases, to end the 1033 program, to investigate every police fatality, to cut the military budget in half. They failed. There was a proposal to cut the military budget just 10%, and Democrats joined Republicans in defeating that proposal. It has to be cut 50%. So I would say you have to be an ally of people who are really taking the tough positions. And that's where it'll be a little harder to go wrong. So I would hope you'd follow us, blackallianceforpeace.com. I hope you read Black Agenda Report. We are going to be asking for, we always want people to support our actions. We're in coalition with other people. So I think those are, that's all good guidance for those who want to know what to support. You can, I think it's probably a good idea. You'll probably always be right if you don't support what an elected official does. But I would say look to people who are already in the forefront of the movement, those people who are already proudly revolutionary, those people who are clearly radical.
Great. Thank you so much to both Margaret and Kirby. So now we're going to move right on to audience Q&A. So the floor is open, like my wallet, every time I go to boba, guys, because I love boba. I expose myself a little bit. And, thank you to folks who have been putting their questions in the chat. I'm just going to scroll up a little bit. Let's see. Okay. So a question from May of NAPCON Northeast. She wants to know if anyone has advice on how to tackle anti-Blackness and racism within our families.
I don't think I can answer that question. But I'll just say this: it's very difficult to speak up with one's family.
Yeah.
I experienced that when Obama was president. As a good leftist, of course, I didn't like any American president, and Black people absolutely loved him, still do. It was difficult to speak up, but I think the more often you speak up, the less likely people are to make a racist statement. And I say that knowing that can be difficult. I would say in general, when people say something that you find offensive, you can say something simple like, that's not cool, or I don't like that. It's, you're trying both to protect yourself and let the other person know that this is not acceptable. I think sometimes it's better when we're trying to change minds, not to preach to people, but just tell them what you're doing. Tell them about your experience with a Black person or a group, or especially if it's someone they know. You could say, you're talking about Joe Smith here, but I would say as best you can, try to speak up, as difficult as it can be. It really is, it is important.
Awesome. Thank you, Margaret. Kirby, do you have any input on that question?
Yeah. Well, I agree with what Margaret already said, that you speak up as much as you can. Do what you can. In terms of like strategies, I always get asked this, but I'll just give you examples. So some of my friends actually did it by sharing straight up numbers to their family members. Like, this is the number of Black people being killed, and then that was effective for that specific parent. And then I have family members who were or people who talk to their family members in terms of like sharing stories of what happened, or like sharing like again, make it relatable to them, like people they know. Like, hey, I know people who or for me, I guess for me, there's anti-Blackness in my family, and then I wrote the book, and then now they really want to learn more. And now my grandma has been has been sending out a lot of my books to her friends to educate the community about our shared struggles. So really like find find a way to connect to them. It's difficult. It is difficult, and I don't really have a magic answer to this question, but yeah.
Awesome. And then next, my brain went blank for a second. Next question from the community, from Angelica. So they're saying, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. A lot of Phil-Ams, specifically in the San Francisco Bay Area, feel a lot of kinship with both Latinx and Black communities, both from similarities in cultures and due to othering and lack of representation in the media. That being said, there is a lot of borrowing from Black American culture within the Phil-Am diaspora. Now, with that in mind, how can, my thing stopped scrolling. That being said, how can Filipino and Filipinx show up for the Black activism without co-opting or shifting the focus from the people who should be centered in the conversation and the action?
Well, I think it's important to have that in mind. Police murder especially is something that is a particular problem for Black people. But I think what one can do is work with people towards the goals that I mentioned, so that if someone in your community talks about community control of the police or coming up with some legislation, I think it's important to say, we're going to support you, so that you step up without stepping on people's toes or taking the attention away from the issue. I think it's also helpful. It's very important now, and this is difficult. You don't want to take attention away from this very real problem of individuals being killed, but it's a larger problem about justice. You're not going to have a non-racist just society when all these other things that I've already mentioned are taking place. So I would recommend always being involved in many actions. If it's homeless action, if it's any number of things that's happening in your community, to join up and to be supportive of the people who turn up for their march, turn up for their talk, turn up for their webinar, sign that letter or that petition. If they go to meet with an elected official, go with them. And I think that's very important, to show concern and to show support, and also to make it clear that there are a variety of issues out there that will bring justice to all of us.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Margaret. Kirby, any further additions you want to put on to that?
I think Margaret said it well. Yeah, be there, be supportive, be there for the people, not just, yeah. Thanks, Margaret.
Awesome. Okay, and then
someone says Jerome is
frozen. Jerome is frozen.
Yeah,
Vivian,
I think,
you can take over.
So Jerome is frozen, but we had another question that came up recently, and it was asking how we can, I guess, incorporate all this within Filipino clubs, and I guess, how our youth or the younger generation can incorporate this more into our social activities. If either of you want to speak about that.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
So the question was, how can Filipino clubs incorporate, I guess, talks about how to be more supportive to maybe not just Black liberation, but also to other communities, and how we can, show support in that manner.
Yeah. I guess what I was going to say was, at least from what I've seen, a lot of the Filipinx, Filipino student orgs, youth organizations across the country have been hosting a lot of these talks, a lot of these forums, a lot of learning, learning. Um, but I guess if the person asking this question is from a specific Filipino youth org, is to urge that org to join an alliance. Like for example, we have Kabataan Alliance, which is similar to NAFCON, is like an alliance of different Filipino youth organizations across the country who are taking actions to an action-oriented platform where they can learn and then keep what do you call this? Sustain. Not just like talk about Black lives because it's viral on social media right now, but to really take actions where it could be sustained and be genuine about it. So yeah, if you're from an org, a youth or Filipino youth org, join Kabataan Alliance. Have a great platform and programs. Yes, Angelica said you got to make an effort to break that in as a part of the culture of your group. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And Margaret, do you want to add on before we move on to the next slide by chance?
No, I don't.
Okay. All right. So I guess since Jerome is not here, I will just mention some of the few action plans that we have. So some things that were mentioned, and we will be sending all of this over to folks after this as well. But in addition to, speaking to our peers and our family members about this, we can also follow and donate to Black Alliance for Peace and Bulosan Center for Filipino Studies, as well as National Alliance for Filipino Concerns. And there's also a few extra readings. We can look at Black Lives and Brown Freedom, Untold Histories of War, Solidarity, and Genocide, as well as Prejudicial Black America and the Presidents. There's also a lot of content at blackagendareport.com. And Kimberly and Margaret both have a Patreon if you want to donate and look at that as well.
Thanks. I wanted to speak to something. Someone was talking about using social media. Everybody's a creator. And I think everybody has something to say. Everyone has ideas. And let's use the internet while it's still open to us for all of us to express ourselves. Everybody starts from somewhere. I didn't start out as a writer. And now here I am 60 years old and published a book. And I'm not saying you have to publish a book, but everyone has ideas they can share. Everyone can be a creator. So I urge everyone to do that in some way. Have your own Patreon. You have something to say. So I wanted to put that in there.
Mm-hmm. And Jerome is actually back. So you didn't miss too much, but I'll give the spotlight back to you. We're just talking about some of the action plans.
All right, great. Sorry about that, folks. My Wi-Fi decided to take a vacation without getting my approval, and I was like, no, JK, I'm back. I need to be here. Okay, so thank you everyone for having a sense of humor. So yeah, taking action, next steps, I can just read right here. So Black Alliance for Peace has some ongoing campaigns such as Compromise and Retreat, Get the U.S. Out of Africa, Shut Down AFRICOM, as well as the 2020 Candidate Accountability Pledge. You can also donate to the Black Alliance for Peace. And then there's also a fun little resource here. I forgot to take this again because my brain is oatmeal, once again, folks, where you can check your implicit bias. And this is actually provided by one of our fellow KS members, Jasmine. And I'm not sure how much I had missed, but Margaret, if you'd like to elaborate a little bit more about the campaigns listed here for BAP.
Sure. BAP has our first compromise. Oh my goodness, it's a mouthful of a title. Let's see if I can remember it. No compromise, no retreat. Stop the war against Black African people in the U.S. and abroad. I got it. And as part of that No Compromise, No Retreat campaign, we have the Shut Down Africa campaign, candidate accountability pledge. We're asking candidates for office, not just Congress, even local elected offices to sign a pledge regarding the issues I mentioned: cutting the military budget, ending the 1033 program, stopping police violence. And that's something where we can have solidarity as well. You know, we've got to bring foreign policy back into the forefront. It's something that is hardly ever discussed anymore. And people who think themselves progressive or left actually go along with these horrible policies. So that's something where I'm just talking off the top of my head, I can see us going to Capitol Hill to talk about all of our concerns about US support for this violent regime in the Philippines, for any number of things. So I would urge you to check out Black Alliance for Peace. We do not go to big foundations. We depend on the people for support. The nonprofit industrial complex is a trap. You can't bite the hand that feeds. So we go directly to the people. And I will take that implicit bias. Is it a test? It seems to, yes, it's a test. So I will do that.
I was just going to explain, I can explain quickly too if anyone's interested. It's at the Harvard website. The implicit bias test is really just, it's a Spitfire test with just two options where you just click back and forth. And the whole point is so that by going as quickly as possible, you're just reacting on instinct, so you can parse through what is what's a bias and what's just the type errors or other things. So they've managed to isolate for any sort of errors, and you can get a really great idea of what your implicit bias is, and they do it by category.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Jasmine. And then I think that we can move to the next slide. We'll also put the link. We can actually, if it's, we can actually probably share this PowerPoint with folks afterwards as well. All right. And San. Okay, we have upcoming events and announcements. I remember how to read now, folks. So this is a good time. If Margaret and Kirby have any other announcements they'd like to go over for everyone before we close out for tonight.
I just want to try to take advantage, as I was saying, of opportunities like this. So this is just an example. I participated in a webinar with a Canadian group, Canadian Voice of Women for Peace, and it was about white supremacy and its connection to militarism and violence in NATO and in Africa. NATO is a huge problem. The NATO nations have done great damage to the world, destroying Libya. They're really a collection of vassal states of the US. Canada is included in that. And I hope you take a look at that. If you just Google, actually, if you go to the Black Alliance for Peace on YouTube page, you can see some of my videos. You can follow me on Twitter, Freedom Ride Blog on Twitter. And any interview I give, any webinars I partake in, I always announce on Twitter, and I have a Facebook page, Margaret Kimberley, my page, and anybody can see what I'm up to there.
Awesome. And then I believe I have so many things clouding my screen. There is, you want to know. Okay, And then, oh, your book, I was gonna say, is coming out. It actually came out quite a few months ago. If you want to speak more on that.
Yes, my book, Prejudential, was published in February. Black America and the Presidents. And I have it's 45 essays, one on each president, about the top you see. Cornell West was kind enough to give me a blurb. All 45 presidents, and I conclude that none of them were friends of Black people. And I think it's especially important to read this book now, where we're being told again that there is, we have to suspend disbelief, suspend our very powers of observation, and get behind the horrible Joe Biden, because Trump is so terrible. Trump is terrible, but Biden is terrible too. And I think it's important. I'm gonna, if I may, read from the first chapter. I mentioned W.E.B. Du Bois, who spoke so passionately against the war against the Philippines. He said this in 1956. In 1956, I shall not go to the polls. I have not registered. I believe that democracy has so far disappeared in the United States that no two evils exist. There is but one evil party with two names, and it will be elected despite all I can do or say. So obviously, I think my book is wonderful. You can get it on Amazon if you don't want to use Amazon, and I certainly understand. You can get it from the publisher, Steerforth Press. I will put it in the chat, steerforth.com, and you can order the book directly from them. You can also order it from Barnes and Noble. And I can't wait to read Kirby's book too. I'd like to hear more about that. Thanks.
Thank you. I guess that's a segue to me. Yeah, thanks, Margaret. Yeah, so my book is not available now, but it's on Ogat Clothing, which is an activist-owned a brand in the Bay Area. So if you order through Ogat Clothing, I'm actually going to sign it in the indigenous scripts from the Philippines. But yeah, my book was released last November 2018 on my 30th birthday, which also happens to be the 121st anniversary of David Fagan switching sides. So I think that's the universe telling me something. But yeah, so you can also learn more about the names that Margaret mentioned, like Ida B. Wells Burnett. She's in my book. Illustrated by one of our students from UC Davis. Yeah, because she did connect the issue of lynching in the U.S. with the genocide that was happening in the Philippines. Also, Du Bois is here. So the names Margaret mentioned are actually also in my book. So if you want to learn more from the perspective on the Philippine-American War and the solidarity between Black and Brown people during that time, yeah, definitely get my book. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, and then, oh, Kirby, I think there's one more event that I think we would like you to highlight. It's the leadership training coming up.
Yes. So there's a leadership training that Kabataan Alliance is hosting with NW FASA in the Pacific Northwest. I'll be teaching the history part of the Filipino people's history on August, I believe it was August 19th of the whole series of events. So yeah, I'm one of the speakers, and I'll be talking talking about the history of the Philippines from the people's perspective, from the revolutionary perspective, not just what you see on the textbooks. Yeah.
Okay. All right. You get to hear my voice once again, folks. And then another upcoming event, I'm not sure if this was covered since my Wi-Fi was out for a hot moment. We have another event coming up Monday, August 24th at 8 o'clock Eastern Time, or 5 p.m. if you're on the West Coast. Or if you happen to be in the Philippines, August 25th, 8 a.m. Nice and early. There's another event called Never Again to Martial Law, looking at the impacts of the anti-terror law on Moro and Luma communities. And this is part of a series. This is part 3. I'll also put the link to register in the chat super quick. Let's see, we're the collaborating orgs on there, as well as Liang Network, iChirp US, Sabukahan, Sandugo, and I don't know I can't read the logo. It's very like compressed.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Wala pang Samoro.
Okay. 2, 4, 8. Okay, so the registration link is now in the chat. Okay. And then we also have other events for Kingston Down coming up. We have our more of our praise productions Rena Yung on replay on Facebook. Also have more NAFCON artist talks, and as well as Asian American racial justice trainings. And you can join our mailing list for updates. I'll also put this link in the chat so you can sign up. Oh, perfect. Thank you, Anthony Malika. And now we're gonna move right on to our very last slide just to wrap things up real nicely. And I'll have Jasmine actually take over from this point.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jasmine Malave. I'm a New York City-based artist and activist and a member of Kending Sindao. For those of you joining us on Zoom, I've just dropped the web addresses into the chat, the ones that we're going to go over very quickly. And yes, this is our final slide. So Kending Sindao is working hard to create an action plan that holds us accountable. One way we're promising to do this is through Asian American focused racial justice training. It's a workshop that I'm actually going to be spearheading. So if you want to get more information about that, that's going to be that firsttinyurl.com, joining our mailing list, and we'll be able to get information once we set the date. As we endeavor to amplify the Black struggle for self-determination in our interlocking calls against US imperialism and neocolonialism, there are some ways where we will continue to do this through agitation in some key areas. First off, we want to reduce the military budget. This is an important first step for combating neocolonialism and the use of the military to destabilize regions all over the planet. We need to shut down AFRICOM. Thank you to Margaret for bringing this to our attention. In a related subject, we need to build opposition to other US economic sanctions. Specifically in this moment, there is a call to action that is currently taking place. And I quote, "We need to suspend United States security assistance in the Philippines until such a time as human rights violations by Philippine security forces cease and the responsible state forces are held accountable." You can learn more about this and sign the petition by visiting the humanrightsph.org link. Next, we need to free US political prisoners. I encourage everyone to visit the Alliance for Global Justice website, AFGJ, Alliance for Global Justice, for more info. The Alliance for Global Justice defines political prisoner as people who are jailed based on charges related to resistance to oppression and repression. And this list, just briefly, to my horror, is much too long to go through fully right now with everybody, but it includes American activists, members of BPP and Black Liberation, water protector prisoners from the Dakota Access Pipeline protests, Guantanamo inmates subject to torture and inhumane conditions, and lastly, the many mass incarceration victims of this country, including but not limited to immigrant detention centers, especially given that our prison industrial complex acts as a social control mechanism as well as legal slave labor. And we also need to expose human rights violations in the United States. More info on this is available at the Amnesty International website, amnesty.org. Similarly, we need to oppose Israel training law enforcement officers, especially while the Israeli government continues to rack up documented human rights violations. More info on this is also available at the Amnesty International website, and it's not limited to just US police forces, but also to those all over the globe. This is especially true of Filipino enforcement officers in the wake of the recent murder of an unarmed 71-year-old peaceful social activist and local leader, Ka Randy, and his neighbor. Our friend, Jonathan Sadaray, is going to take a moment to tell us a little bit about the recent tragedy.
Hi, everyone. Can you guys just type in the chat box yes, or let me know if you can hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Awesome, thank you. Well, to start off, only be a couple minutes, but my name is Jonathan Sadaray, and I currently serve as the chair of the New York Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines, which is part of a greater global coalition that fights for human rights in the Philippines. Shout out to our presenters this evening, Kirby and Margaret, for their very enlightening talks, really insightful. And heartfelt thanks to our good friends, Kinding Sindao, for the opportunity to speak for a few minutes this evening. I'll have 3 different parts, basically just like what happened, who is Ka-Randy, and like what we can do. And so just that Jasmine was talking about, this past Monday, August 10th, Randall Ka-Randy Achanis was killed at his home in Novaliches. So Quezon police essentially, it's really tough because his body was at a wake. The Quezon police forcibly took his body during the wake, brought him to a different funeral parlor, even though his wife positively like identified his body and even talked about possible marks of torture. Police have also arrested the paralegal at the wake who for obstruction of justice. And thankfully, after like national and international outcry, the body has since been returned to the family. And this is just a really alarming time in the Philippines because Achanis is actually the 3rd consultant killed in the Philippines. The first was Sotero Llamas, who was killed by 3 unidentified men in 2006. And the second was Randy Malayao, who was killed in 2019 while sleeping on a bus during a stopover. So who is Randall Ka-Randy Achanis, and like why was this person slain? So basically, Ka-Randy was a peaceful social activist and tirelessly fought for genuine land reform, rural development, and national industrialization. He was the national chairperson of an Akbawi's party list, which is a political party of trade union workers, peasants, fisherfolk, national minorities, urban and rural poor, and also the deputy secretary general of Kibusan Magbubukid ang Pilipinas, which is the broad organization of peasants. So if we think about our current analysis of the Philippines, knowing that the majority of the Filipino people are peasants and workers, Ka-Randy was truly a leader and advocate for the large masses of people, and his understanding of society and his understanding of what needed to happen was really most highlighted in his contributions to CASER, which is the Comprehensive Agreement on Social and Economic Reforms, which was an agreement that would have sought to uplift the Filipino peasantry even after generations of economic violence. So in short, to say Ka-Randy was really remarkable, and I think that's what really made him a threat to the state. As we know, the Philippines is on a very slow fascist procession towards like totalitarian rule. I'm thinking in the past couple months about like Maria Ressa, world-renowned journalist who was convicted of cyber libel. I'm thinking about the Pride 20, a group of LGBTQ protesters who were violently dispersed and jailed. I'm thinking about Brandon Lee, Bay Area native, Chinese-American environmental activist who just last week was actually the 1-year anniversary of his attempted assassination attempt. So long story short, there's hella shit going down in the Philippines, and it's up to us, right, to amplify the calls of our kababayans back home. So even in the midst of this like really, really heavy and sad event of this, you know, social peace leader being murdered, even though it is like half a world away, it's hard to think that we can even do anything. But just like Jasmine said, one of the best ways that we can do is actually by educating ourselves and by taking action, and she already talked about one of them. So in addition to supporting our speakers today and their various organizations, I'm going to send 2 links into the chat. The first is to junk the anti-terror law. So while signing a petition might not seem like that big of a deal, please consider like getting educated on this and amplifying the calls to scrap something that essentially punishes people who critique the government. And the second one, Jasmine already brought up, is to pass the FRA, the PHRA, the Philippine Human Rights Act, because y'all, $550 million has been sent to the Philippines, and that money is being used for the Philippine National Police, the Armed Forces of the Philippines, to kill upwards of 30,000 people. 30,000 people since Duterte has taken office. So if there's anything that we can do, sign that petition to junk the anti-terror law, get to know the FRA, the Philippine Human Rights Act, and if you really want to do some extra credit, get your congressmen, get your local organizations, get your churches, get your friends to endorse, to sponsor, to learn about the Philippine Human Rights Act, because like Jasmine said, it's time to hold these people accountable. There's way too much, there's blood on our hands. These are our tax dollars. our tax dollars that are being used to fund these killings. So, Maraming salamat. Thank you so much for getting sent out for a couple of minutes to chat. Feel free to hit me up separately if you want to talk more.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. Yeah, so all of the things happening. I appreciate you going in depth a little bit more for us. And so that brings us to the final little point that we had in the slideshow. I think it got pulled, but I can just read it. It's, what does this solidarity look like in practice within our Filipino AX community organizations? And this is a question that I don't know that I can necessarily answer. It's going to look different for different people, but I do know that this is a question we'll continue to ask ourselves as we try to be effective allies. I hope to take time in our racial justice workshop to have our members agree on a solidarity and action promise, and we welcome and suggest any suggestions in our journey of allyship. And so the last link that I put into the Zoom chat, which I'll put in the links one more time, is actually our website, where you can find out more about our mission statement and also where you can contact us with any suggestions that you might have with us moving forward. And so that is down at the close of this. I want to thank you all so much.
Wait. Stop, wait. I can't, your sound is going out, Jasmine. And
Somebody, we might need to mute somebody whose sound is a little too high. If we can just mute whoever's making all of those noises. I'm not sure who it is. Okay, I think we're okay now. So before we leave, I just wanted to send everyone off with one last thing. Just want to remind everyone and take a moment that this is a moment for solidarity, and that solidarity is of the utmost importance right now. Speaking specifically to our Asian American guests and members of Kinding Sindao, I think that some of us might have forgotten our stake in the fight, and maybe some of us have only recently been reminded because of the recent uptick of virus-related Asian hate crimes. But we have to be honest, and we have to agree that it's a drop in the bucket compared to what the Black community has faced and continues to face. Asians in America have benefited and continue to benefit from our proximity to whiteness. We're touted out as beacons of the American dream, working hard at the expense of our health for whatever slices of freedom those in power think we deserve. And while there may have been some short-term benefits to the plan, there's also been a tremendous cost. Our people have been emasculated, fetishized, tokenized, and used as props for this model minority myth, which is just that, a myth. The Asian community in America is the least likely to report mental health issues or stress, and are yet 3 times more likely than any other group to think about taking their own lives. So for these reasons and so many, many more, now is the time to gather our resources and social capital, anything that we've been afforded, in order to fully support the Black struggle for equality. If we pretend that this movement doesn't affect us, or if we nitpick and argue over whose oppression is worse, then white supremacy stays on top. Our struggles are siblings, and the sooner we can accept the similarities while respecting key differences, the sooner we can combat this together as a united front. On behalf of Kinding Sindao, I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. Beautiful closing statement, very powerful as well. And folks, no worries. We are going to be posting this recording on the Kinding Sindao Facebook page once we have all the technical stuff figured out. And if folks would like, I would like to join us. We're going to take a quick group snapshot. If you do not want to be in the snapshot, that is totally okay. We just ask that you exit the session, but this will be made available on Facebook, as well as all the resources we've listed thus far. Viv, I trust that you are better at taking the screenshot than I am, because I am not that great at it.
Got you. So we don't all fit on the same screen because there's a lot of us, which is good. So I'm going to be taking 2. So I'll just say 1, 2, 3 once, and I'll say 1, 2, 3 again. Oh, I'm just waiting for everyone to share their video. Okay, awesome. Great. So
yeah. Some
Right.
people are camera shy, I guess.
All right, 1, 2, 3. Oh, wait, sorry. One person wasn't ready. All right, I'll do it again. 1, 2, 3. All right, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And
Thank
again,
you.
yes. If you would like, feel free to get in contact with us. If you have further questions, you want further information or resources, we're more than happy to provide that for you. And also feel free, please follow our speakers on social media, everywhere. Their Patreons, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, you name it, all of that jazz. And please have, oh my God, I can't talk anymore. Help. My brain is like beyond oatmeal now.
I think
Okay,
Kirby
well,
wanted
enjoy the
to
rest of
say
your night.
something.
Anyway, don't forget to save the chat. If you
Yes,
notice,
yes.
does everybody know how to save the chat?
There was a lot of great. I just also wanted to say that the chat was very engaging. So thank you. I think Jerome set the tone for us to be able to just like have a lot of banter. So thank you for allowing us to like really have an active. Actually, it's been the most active chat I've ever seen in all the webinars I've had under the pandemic. So I don't know if that's an award to get, Jerome, but it kind of it could be. So really appreciative for sharing time together, everyone. So
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. And don't forget, join our dance on Saturday. Plugging it in.
Kirby, you said
yeah.
you had something else you wanted to share.
I just want to say salamat to everybody, and then just to remind everyone what salamat really means, because people think nowadays that it's just a Filipino word to say thank you, but salamat is actually our ancestors' way of wishing somebody peace. It's related to the way our Muslim friends greet each other. Salam. It's from the same root word salam, which means peace. So in the Philippines back then, before colonialism, our ancestors say or share their gratitude by wishing somebody, the other person, peace, prosperity, and good health. So that's what salamat really means, is really wishing everybody peace. So salamat, everybody. I wish you all peace. Good health, and yes, there we go. Salamat po. But yeah, just to remind everybody that our even our words, our phrases are deeper, have deeper indigenous roots than white supremacy would like to think.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank
Maraming
you for
salamat. Thank you very much. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Kirby.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Jerome. Thank you, everyone.
Yes.
Isang bagsak! Isang bagsak. The successful webinar on Black liberation and more to come. Isang bagsak! Thank you.
I was late. Sorry.
It's all good. Ingat, folks.
Thank you.
Salamat.